Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast, where we experience life being the real you. I am so excited. This is season 4. Season 4, we are going to explore some very great topics, but the theme this season is going to be navigating transitions. And I'm so excited to bring back my resident guest or co-pilot for this season. And it is my wife, Dr. Sherlonda Adkins, the Unstuck Strategist. Welcome back to the Produce on Purpose podcast. How are you, baby?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Always happy to be back and talk and help some people get unstuck and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so we are going to just jump into this episode, and the initial part of what we want to talk about is going to be talking about navigating transitions and those times of life when things change, when transitions happen, and we are going through that in our lives right now. So at this moment in our lives, we have our last child is graduating from high school. She graduated, now is going to college, and there's a transition. I also talk about this in the Produce on Purpose book. In the introduction, I bring up a scripture. The scripture is Ecclesiastes 3:1. What does it say?
It says there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens.
So there's a time, there's a season for everything. And whatever your season might be, there's a time for it. There's a time for us to have a lot of laughter, a lot of joy. There's a time when you work extremely hard. I remember when the kids were we're trying our best to get them food after a hard day of work. I mean, a lot. Schedules.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, been on the other side of it. So the other day when we left Bible study, and I was like, I want some fries. And so our dinner was fries at Chick-fil-A.
Fries at Chick-fil-A. I don't think we could get by with giving the kids just fries at Chick-fil-A.
No. So that was definitely a bird launching flex. And I noticed I said bird launching and not empty nest, because empty nest just sounds depressing. We're not cultivating empty nest. We are cultivating bird launching and finalizing bird launching season. So that was a bird launching flex to be able to have Chick-fil-A fries with ketchup for dinner.
There you go. So during these seasons, there are times of learning that we end up having. And during these transitions, we have to learn how to navigate those transitions. And that's where this theme has come from of what we're talking about. And that's what the scripture is talking about, that there's a time for everything under the sun, everything that is going on. So wherever you may be at this moment, there is a season for it. So
yeah, and I was just going to say, with giving some examples, we're talking about a season in our parenting journey, but for some of our listeners, it may be a child being born. It could be losing a loved one. It could be relocating, changing a job, ending a relationship, health. A lot of times people don't think about health, but that's a season of change too.
Yeah.
Whether getting over a sickness or finding out about a new diagnosis, and retiring. So that's another big one that people look forward to. And that is a season. So multiple seasons.
Multiple seasons. And that quote was actually right out of my book, Produce on Purpose, Experience Life Being the Real You. It talks about those transitions. I talk about that in the very introduction of talking about, are you ready to be a producer? And as we're going through on the Produce on Purpose podcast, and as we've gone through on other episodes, how do we become great producers even in the midst of these transitions? So we'll jump right in.
All right, let's do it.
So this episode we are calling The Empty Nest and the Launch Pad for our family's great transitions. So the empty nest and the launch pad. So as we are looking at this and we're moving forward, I have one question that comes to mind with me. How do you actually manage moving through the emotions of navigating a transition, even when it's good or bad. Sometimes we like to label things good or bad. How
Mhm.
do you begin to go through that?
Well, I think the first thing is describing how you feel at a particular moment because we weren't really taught as children how to identify and connect with our emotions. And that was a big girl before I started learning other words to describe how I was feeling. Words like I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm excited. But what about I'm overwhelmed, or I feel threatened, I feel insecure, or I feel fulfilled? Using some of those words to describe where you are at a particular moment. And the reason that is important is because if you can describe it, then you can figure out how to get more of that. If it's what we say is a positive emotion, we can determine how to get more of that and move into that direction. And if it's something that's not so positive, then we can acknowledge this is where I am at the moment, but I'm not always going to be here, and figure out a plan to move forward. So when we're in transition, just to sit still long enough to identify with how we're feeling. And I don't really think society supports that, because sometimes sitting still to get that awareness of how you feel requires just being still. But oftentimes we still have to work. We still have to take care of our children or our parents or our spouses, even ourselves. So it's not always easy to do that. It has to be taught, and it has to be practice.
I like it. And when you talk about practice, and I feel that during this time of our lives, that sometimes just reflecting and doing some self reflection of where we have come from and the excitement that now comes with seeing the children go to different areas of life, for
Mhm.
them to be the contributors in society as we prayed for over the years, that God has gotten them to this particular place, along with guiding us in the directions, even when we didn't know
Oh, yes.
what was going on. I mean, there were so many times I just felt
Mm.
inadequate to be able to move forward. However, to get to this point, we do find out that every season is just temporary, and that we end up in a space where our emotions may be a particular way at this moment, and we must acknowledge where our emotions are and how we feel at this moment, or what may be going on in the inside of us, and then maybe why you may be acting the way that you're acting or feeling the way that you feel. And as we are moving into this, I've had a myriad of emotions. I mean, from the emotions of, wow, what do we do now? To emotions of, we did that thing, girl.
Hey. Yeah, that's
To
mostly where I am.
so it all begins to work out and move in our direction, and it's exciting to see it all just pan out. So very, very excited to see it continue to be something that we are working with.
And let me say something about that. So that second emotion where you're talking about feeling fulfilled and accomplished and the high five moments, I
Yes.
want to normalize that, because a lot of times when people would approach me and say, oh my gosh, how do you feel? Your youngest daughter is about to graduate. I know it's bittersweet. I know you're feeling so sad. And I'm like, actually, I'm not. I'm not feeling sad at all. And our neighbor, oh, Miss Janice, she is the sweetest neighbor that I think we've ever had. And she always catches me off guard with some of her responses, because they're always like so unconventional in a good way. And so she came over the other day as we were celebrating our daughter's graduation. And I said to her, I said, I haven't cried. And I was kind of feeling a little bit like a little guilty, maybe, that I hadn't cried. And you know what Miss Janice said? She said, cry for what? She said, cry for graduation. She's like, no, I didn't cry when any of mine graduated. She said, weddings either, because that's what you want. That is what you have been working hard for. You have been preparing for this moment. And I said, thank you. And I really excelled. And I just, I felt seen. And that's exactly how I felt. We have been preparing for this moment. And it's okay to say that we feel fulfilled. Now, there may be some tears that come later. I don't know. But in this moment, I'm just feeling very accomplished and then confident too. Because one of the hardest things that I have ever had as a job has been raising children. And so to get to this point, in our parental journey with the help of the Lord. And to get to this point, it's like, hey, I can do hard things. So what's next? I can do hard things. So I just wanted to take this time to say, if there's anybody who's feeling like, I don't feel sad, it's okay. You don't have to feel sad. Go with naming some of your other emotions. Like for me, it's fulfillment, it's accomplished, it's optimism, it's hope, all those wonderful things.
And it's just an exciting time because not only is our youngest daughter graduating, but we just also just about a month ago, our son graduated from college and he's working and he's on his own, and our oldest is working and on her own. And man, the changes, the shifts that have happened, they have moved from knocking on our door on Saturday morning, asking us what's for breakfast, to now they're doing their thing.
Yes.
And it is really exciting to just have that happen in our lives. And we have the emotions that really drive us. And I also get the question of, well, how did you end up with oldest daughter who's 24, living in Dallas and enjoying her life? Our son, he's living in New Jersey and working in New York, and our daughter about to go to a prestigious university. How did you do this?
Yeah, and so I guess that'll be the book, the whole playbook, right? But I will say that I've always been very goal oriented. I can remember even in middle school having my trapper keeper. Did you have a trapper keeper?
I did.
Okay, trapper keeper. So if you are not mid 40s or older, you might not know what a trapper keeper is, but it's basically like a notebook or a binder to help you stay organized when you're in school. And I can remember writing a list of things. I always love writing things, checking them off my list. And that followed me into adulthood. I don't know if you remember, but when we first got married and we had some goals written down, personal goals, and even, what year we might have wanted to start a family. And so, as one would expect, that would follow through with when we became parents, to have a list of goals. And people do ask the question often, like, oh my gosh, your kids are so successful. How did you do it? And I will say that exposure was a big thing for us. We wanted our children to have exposure to a lot of different things, primarily like extracurriculars. So we've been in cold ice skating rinks for ice skating lessons, all the sports you can think of, art classes, cooking classes, fish camps, science camps, all these different things, because the more that they're able to have it, put their hands on, then they're able to identify what they like and what they don't like. There were some things they were like, nope, we don't want to do this again. And so I think that having the, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the foresight to look for different programs for the kids was extremely helpful. And then also being in tune with where their natural gifts and abilities tended to show up, and trying to cultivate what seemed to be natural for them as well.
And intention, right? The intention behind the exposure. I remember when they were smaller, we made sure that whatever trips we would take, they were going to be national trips, not international, because we wanted to make sure that they would remember if we were to go internationally. Additionally, it was also more cost effective and budget conscious to do trips within the nation. So we would go all throughout the nation, make sure that they're exposed within our own nation. So one time we went all the way to California. We did a West Coast trip, and that type of exposure was also there. And we were involved in school activities. I was a coach for football, basketball. Being a integral part of their development and having the conversations in the moment when they're upset about being on the team or upset about something that's going on. I believe those are the moments where it makes a difference in their lives. And then we leave it all up to God, because there's not a
Yes.
place in this where we could say we did it all, but God had to have his hand in it. But what we could do, we were obedient in those places. And there are a lot of times we made a lot of mistakes. We made a
Mm-hmm.
lot of mistakes. But even in the midst of our own mistakes, we still see God show up, and he's shown up every single time.
And that's important because if we start thinking about wanting to do things to perfection, first of all, my idea of perfection anyway is going to shift as I learn more. So that's a moving target. And moving targets can be dangerous in terms of making you frustrated. So not having to have every piece of the puzzle figured out, but just moving forward what you have and trusting that God is going to fill in the gaps and provide that cushion, that bumper. I think about bowling and, they have the bumpers up for the little kids so the ball doesn't go in the gutter. You still may only knock down one pin, but you're not going to fail. That's definitely been and continues to be a force in our lives, a guiding principle for sure.
And it's interesting because throughout the time, we enjoyed every moment. Not to say we want to go back, because some people were like, well, do you want to go back to those moments? We're like, I don't want to go back. I
Mm-mm,
believe
no.
that those times we were is fully integrated in those moments, enjoyed those moments when we're all jumping in the car and driving somewhere and making sure that they have all the food that they need, or have DVDs and everything to play, and activities. Traveling with little kids is very different than, hey, we're going to be traveling with adults soon.
Yeah, we
Look
were
at
just
that.
talking about that. So next week we go on a family trip and it's all adults. This will be our first family trip of all adults. Well, minus the graduation that just occurred in Pittsburgh. But yes, I'm looking forward to it. It's a huge difference.
Yes, and the thing that I thought about is every time that the children were here, regardless of where we would go or do, there was always something in the back of my mind that making sure that they were okay. Was that similar for you? It's like a running list of trying to make sure that either they're safe, that
You're
they
fed,
have
not
everything that they
hungry.
need, yes, and that they're surviving, that we have provided everything for them. And that back of the mind thing, I don't know. I think it's starting to not be as much going on back there as they are going out and doing their own thing. Are you feeling the same way?
Yeah, and that's that freedom. It's a transition. It's a transition. And we often talk about transitioning from being managers to consultants. So if you're a manager, you do have to be concerned with every aspect of the organization, making sure things flow. But when you're a consultant, you can be kind of outside of the organization and just wait until you're approached when someone needs your advice. And so similarly, at this stage of parenting, they don't need or want us. In fact, think about it. If we chose to still show up as manager of these adults, that could damage the relationship, don't you think?
That would, and I believe that that's a huge transition that you have to allow for them to be able to make it on their own and know that they have everything that they need, and they will call if they need something. And I'm grateful for that, because that transition from being a manager to then moving to more of a maybe a director, let them do a little more, to finally being in a space where we're just advising or consulting based on when they call, is a major transition that any parent needs to go through. We all have to get to that space if our children are going to become, and we say independent, but it's really, we're all interdependent
Mm-hmm.
no matter what we do.
Yes.
It's the spectrum of being in full dependence. We know that when we're babies, we're fully dependent. We have to have someone take care of us. And then as you're moving into the realm of interdependence, and in a greater way, understanding what your support systems are, when to contact them, how to call and get to them. So I always used to make this comment. I said, I would rather my child cry under my roof about something that they're upset about, rather than them get out into this world, have nobody really around them that maybe be supporting them, And then that's the first time they're crying about something. They may not be able to deal with the situation without the right guidance.
Yeah, I love that. And I remember a time when our oldest daughter, she had a dilemma that she was working through. And by the time I found out about it, it was no longer a dilemma. It was solved. But when I heard about it, I was like, oh my goodness, I could have helped you with this. And why didn't you tell me? And she's like, Mom, I'm good. I had friends who went through something similar. So basically what she told me was I had my support system and I figured it out. And it took me a minute to sort of, let the dust settle from that. But what it taught me was that when the kids were little, we were sort of like their main source, their primary source of, nurture and support, care and everything. But as they get older, it's important for them to establish that in their own way with their own circle. And like she said, she had friends who went through something similar. So they were able to support her maybe in ways that I could not have. And I may have mommed her, into the problem, back into the problem. So that was another example of, okay, so I'm the consultant. And even in this case, the consultant wasn't needed.
Right.
And I feel like that was a really healthy way of coming to that realization, because we watch the movies and you see the shouting matches where you're not the boss of me, you're trying to control me, and that's not anything I ever wanted for any of our children, to feel that way. So I'm not saying that I'm perfect, because I like to organize and provide, and so I think I do a pretty good job, but there's still room for improvement. I can admit that.
And that's the difficulty, right? We all are, when we're going through transitions, it's not just us, it's everyone along the way. What are some of the things, and I know I've put in my life some things to try to help, because it is kind of shocking when you're probably at the place now where like, well, you really don't need me to do these things for you anymore now. But I do still want relationship with you. So now this is really talking about relationships and how sometimes our relationships where they shift and they change. What are some good things and practical tips we can utilize to navigate these types of transitions in relationships? So right now we're talking about a parent-child relationship, but this could be also for any relationship, because as the seasons change, our relationship with others also change. They don't always remain the same. And I think it's interesting because I sometimes when I'm talking to a couple for premarital counseling and they're moving from leaving and to cleaving, that the change in that shift, it's not just for the married couple, but it's for maybe if there are children involved, if there are parents that are involved, in-laws involved, everyone has to begin to navigate that. What are some good tips that we can leave with this great audience that will help them understand these are some things to start with to begin to navigate these transitions in these seasons, and maybe something you've used to help you?
A simple question of how can I best support you can go a long way. So you mentioned this applies to transitions and all types of relationships. So I have been blessed with having lots of friends during different stages of my life, all the way from being in high school to first jobs to colleges and adult friendships, just as recently as a couple of years ago. And even people that you've known for decades, sometimes people get stuck in the trap of saying, well, I know her, this is how, like when this happens, she typically gets upset and this is how I show up. But people change, right? We change and our friends change as well. So the way that I may have supported a person in the past may not be what they need at this moment. And simply asking, how can I best support you, is one way to start in navigating these shifts in relationships. And then something else that I think about is I visualize a pie chart. And with that, you have different colors representing different categories in your life. And for us, when we're talking about transitioning from parenting, we have a little more mental real estate that's available now, some physical real estate that's available in terms of our time as far as our schedule. So then the question becomes, do I fill that up with something else? A lot of times that's what people are saying. What else am I going to do now? But maybe it's not so much that you need to introduce something new, but what are some slices of your pie that were small that maybe now you can expand and enhance a bit more? So looking at how you can now spend your time, the quality of the days that you have, designing your life in a way that you didn't have the privilege to design it previously. And we talked about this over the weekend when we were driving, that we were intentional. And at this stage, I don't feel like it's like, oh, now let's go do all the things that we couldn't do, because pretty much everything we wanted to do, we were still doing it, maybe just in spurts,
Right.
in doses. So with that pie chart that we have, maybe we can just expand some of those areas. And so I encourage people to look at life through a lens similar to that. And that also helped. My mom used to say an idle mind is a devil's workshop. So that can, in a way, help decrease anxiety too, because sometimes when people get to these transitions, they start to have fear. They start projecting into the future. Like, I don't know what this is going to look like. Of course we don't. We can't read the future, but simply asking, how can I support you? And having a conversation, communicating that, I love you. I want to be friends with you. I still want to have this relationship with you. And how do we move forward? Sounds simple, but it can go a long way.
I like it because then the quality of our life then really helps to nurture, drive where we're going. And of course, I'm going to focus, and my piece for everyone is when we begin to be authentically who we are, understand who you really are, because you are not the role of
Mm-hmm.
mother or father that you played when your children were younger. You are no longer the role of coach, or you are no longer the role of doing these different things that you may have done. You're not the role. You are who you are. And being able to distinguish between what you may have as gifting that you may have used in different roles, you can now expand that gift into places you choose to be able to expand your role in. A lot of the choices we made was always thinking about, well, what about the children and making sure that they were taken care of. But now we get to make the same choices, but how can I be more impactful with the gift that I have and the purpose that I have and the meaning that I have, the life that I'm living? I can now be that producer in my life. I can begin to produce on the things that I know I'm gifted to do. I just may be now moving into a role or in that pie that you talked about, which maybe I shouldn't be talking about pie. It could be good. It's good in quality, not just quantity, just the quality. Yeah, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking quality. So if I get a small piece of good quality, I'm good. So we'll do that. The good quality pie of being a producer in our lives, and doing that, I think, is a great step to begin to navigate these transitions, and asking that question of how can I support? Well, how can you support someone else? But also, am I looking at who I am? And when we begin to look at who we are and how we are living and the gifting that we have, then you can show up and have even greater impact than you've ever had before.
Mm-hmm.
I
That's
was
true.
talking earlier this year, and the word that came to me was amplify. Amplify this year, and that means that you already have everything that you need. And so you might be in a transition. You may be in a place where things are shifting. One of those seasons we talked about earlier, whether it's childbirth, marriage, you're going through the children now growing up, you're in the bird launching phase, or you are retiring. Wherever you may be, you can start by taking a look and self reflecting,
Mm-hmm.
looking at your time, looking at who you are and where you are in life, and seeing if you can take enough time out to really get back and say, how can I be the most impactful to everyone that I meet, everyone that I end up coming in contact with? What can I do? I believe those are some great areas for us to kind of start talking about and moving forward and launching into what where we are and what we're doing. Anything else that you have for our great listeners that will allow for them to be greater producers maybe get unstuck in what they're doing that will help them as we begin to talk about navigating transitions in our lives?
So I would like to leave the listeners with just understanding that you may experience a multitude of emotions, and that is perfectly normal. Sometimes emotions that you haven't felt in a long time, and sometimes feeling like you're alone, but there's nothing new under the sun. Sometimes patients will say, I know I'm just the worst patient. I know nobody else probably comes to you with all these issues. And I'm like, they do. And it's okay. You're unique, but you are not unique in this aspect. So don't feel like you are alone. I always encourage people when you're navigating difficult times or just uncertain times to try to do it with someone. Don't do it by yourself. Do it with a support system. And sometimes that can be family and friends. Sometimes it may be a professional, but just know that the lens through which you are seeing life now is not the lens that you will always see life through. I have a really impactful card deck called the Get Unstuck card deck, the Inner Journey edition. And I call it Inner Journey because these are questions that you ask yourself. The card deck consists of an ask, an act, and an affirmation. And so I just encourage people whenever they're using the cards, just pick one, and the one that you need is going to find you. So would you like to pick a card today?
Sure. Let me pick one of these great cards that you have here.
All right.
All
So
right.
you have an ask.
I
What's your
have an
question?
ask. It says, self-worth. Even though I know I have put in years of work, do I truly believe I am worthy to live in abundance? Yeah, wow, look at that. That's pretty amazing. Let's see if we can get that one in there. Yeah.
And you would be surprised at how many people struggle with self worth. That there are a lot of people who are navigating life thinking that the more that they prove, the harder that they work, the more that they perform, the more they'll be respected, loved, accepted. And so this is a question for you. Even though you know you've put in years of work, do you truly believe that you are worthy to live in abundance? And abundance is abundance of love, abundance of acceptance, abundance of joy. So my website is drsherlondaadkins.com, and you can find me there. This card deck has gone everywhere. It's gone overseas and has helped a lot of people. So that's one of my ways of giving back to the world and touching people in more ways than I can just one-on-one.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like this card because it talks about self-worth, and one of the areas that I really focus on and share is many times our self-worth is based on the external things that happen in our lives. And many of you may have seen the object lesson that shows if I pull out $1 or $100, probably $100 is probably a little more impactful. I pull out $100 and I crumple it up and I put dirt on it and I do whatever I need to it. And then I say, do you still want the $100? You're going to say, of course I still want the $100, because regardless of what that $100 has been through, the value of that $100 is still the same. And it's the same with us. Regardless of what you've been through in this life, sometimes we may be valuing our worth based on the external circumstances or where you have gone or where you are at this moment, what has happened in your life. You are putting your worth against something that is not your value. Your value is what's been on the inside of you. And that which is on the inside of you, your purpose, the meaning, the intentional pieces of your life, that is what gives you your worth. That's what gives you value. And when we understand that, then when we're navigating these transitions and as producers in this life, we understand that I can create from that place of value. It doesn't matter how the external might look. It doesn't matter how the outside might look today. On the inside, I am still who I am. I'm still that child of God. I am still uniquely and wonderfully made. And you can produce every single thing that you were born to, and you can have those impacts. Oh, I'm so grateful. This is going to be a wonderful season.
Yes, it is. I'm excited. I'm excited to be back with you and share with the world and give back. And when you first asked me about joining you on the podcast, I thought about it. I said, oh my gosh, do I want to commit to it? And I said, yes. And for 3 reasons. So, number one, it's documenting. It's documenting this new season, it's documenting this transition. And then number two, it's a way to give back. And that's probably, but that's first and foremost, like that's the main reason I want to do it is to give back because I do have a heart of service. My life has been dedicated since I was on the playground. Actually, before I even went to school, I was helping people, just listening to them talk and trying to help them piece together their lives. So giving back and then documenting it through this transition, like living it out in real time. And then the third reason I wanted to do it, taking that documentation a step further, is because the age I am now, going back 20 years, oh my goodness, I feel like I have so much more wisdom. So imagine if the Lord allows me to live for, another 20 years, what my 60-something-year-old self would say listening to me now talking. So I would guess that she would say, oh, wow, you lived some more and you got even wiser. So I'm really interested in having this documented so that later on I can go back and listen and see how much I have continued to learn.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I know that the podcast is evergreen. Of course, anyone can go back and listen to prior episodes. Wherever you may be in your life, it can be a transition, can be a change. And I'm excited. Thank you for accepting the invitation and being a part. And so I'm excited for us to move forward. Produce on Purpose has 60 episodes. This is the 61st.
That's amazing, babe.
We're going to move into where we can get to 100 at some point very soon. And I believe that you're going to help along with that journey. So we are going to move forward. And
Well, how much are you paying me to do this?
I'll tell you that later. Don't y'all get on me about that. Well, maybe we'll ask them what you should get paid.
Oh, okay, yes, listeners, help me out here.
So we will take care. I take care of everybody that participates.
Well,
so I'll take care of you.
But just so you know, my size is window seat or aisle seat. That's my sizes.
That's your sizes?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Just in case if you can't pay me and if you want to pay me in gifts instead, I take aisle seats and window seats.
Well, she said it, so we'll go with that. Well, I am so excited. Thank you so much for joining us, and for everyone. As we go through and we talk about navigating transitions this season, I want you to begin to self-reflect in your life. I want you to begin to think about those things that allow for you to really connect with who you are, authentically being the real you, understanding your purpose, knowing what you're supposed to do. And so we'll talk about that in greater detail with more practical steps as we move along the way. We'll maybe even jump into some psychiatry type things and talk about psychology and as well as our spiritual aspects and how they all combine so that we can navigate this life, navigate it in a way, because we are on a journey. And most of all, I want everyone to remember that as you're on this journey, you are supposed to be a producer. You are supposed to produce on your purpose.